The book that I'm discussing today is Emotions Revealed by Paul Ekman, and he's a leading expert in deciphering micro expressions, which are split-second shadows that come across our face that kind of indicate the true nature of our emotions and what we're feeling. And a little bit about him. He initially went in to researching emotions. He went in thinking that expression and gesture were socially learned and culturally variable, meaning like across the cultures they would be different in each thing. They'd be culture specific is what he referred to it as. And the many other researchers that he talked to, such as Margaret Mead, Gregory Bateson, Edward Hall, Ray Birdwhistle, and Charles Osgood, they all thought the same thing. And he spent over 40 years researching facial expressions. He traveled the world searching specifically for remote tribes that had never been exposed to Western culture or influence. And the research and the results that he got from them actually contradicted his initial beliefs, as the expressions and the gestures that corresponded for each emotion were the same across the cultures. There were seven specific universal emotions that he was investigating, which I'll talk about later. Going back to this, the fact that they were the same across the cultures, he even wrote in his book that if expressions signal different emotions in culture, then total outsiders with no familiarity with the culture should not have been able to interpret the expressions correctly, which is a valid conclusion to come to given the results that he had. Another researcher that he references later, Scherer, found evidence of universals, which he refers to them as, which are some kinds of triggers reported to evoke the same emotions across very different cultures. So he did compare his work a lot to external investigators and researchers to see if they had similar results, and he would often base his research off of that as well. So many of his studies were natural experiments with opportunity sampling, as the experiments were conducted in the normal areas where the tribe members who happened to live there, opportunity where they lived. However, it was still an experimental design, as they were completing tasks that they wouldn't have normally done. One such example of this I'll talk about was when he went and showed photographs to people of 5 different cultures in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Japan, and the US. And they were asked to judge the emotion that was shown in each facial expression. It's just one such example of his natural experiment. The strengths of a natural experiment, specifically his, was that there was higher ecological validity. What they were doing was likely to reflect real life due to its natural setting. Some limitations: there could have been extraneous variables that may bias the results, meaning that replication of the study may not have been easy. And with his specifically, since they were investigating emotions and asking people to interpret images or create these emotions themselves, their current emotions, whatever they were feeling in that moment, could have influenced the results that they produced. Some other issues with the studies were that some cultures didn't have words that translated to the English words for certain emotions, the ones that he was investigating. And he had to alter his methods a little bit for this study, for these kinds of studies, by having them describe a situation that would have caused this person in the photograph to make that face. And then he had to deduce which of the 7 universally recognized emotions he was investigating, which were sadness, anger, surprise, fear, disgust, contempt, and happiness. He had to deduce himself which response they correlated to. So there could have been some researcher bias in many of his studies. However, what he did do well was, as I mentioned earlier, comparing his research to other psychologists' research, investigators' research, as well as basing some of his own research off of theirs. He even worked with some other investigators to examine stuff further, bringing in researcher triangulation. So although there was a lot of limitations to what he did, there were some strengths as well. And this will bring me to my big ideas. One is emotions and the evolutionary aspect. He talks about how emotions evolve to prepare us to deal quickly with the most vital events in our lives, and emotions prepare us to deal with important events without our conscious thinking about having to do so. Over time, our emotions evolved so that we could subconsciously respond to certain situations, because some things, if you have quicker emotional responses, it can be beneficial. From his research, he developed the idea that our ancestors found certain emotions to be beneficial for survival, as in like Darwin's theory of natural selection. For example, disgust, which we talked about in class. If two people saw a mushroom and one thought it looked good enough to eat and the other was disgusted by it, the person who eats it dies, that trait of disgust, which proved beneficial, would be passed on. He also explained that our automatic appraisers, which continually scan the world around us, detecting when something important to our welfare or to our survival is happening, are part of the evolutionary aspect as well. He concluded that these auto-appraisers, which he refers to them as throughout the book, are on alert for specifically two kinds of triggers, or are sensitive to two kinds of triggers. They're sensitive to emotional triggers found in everyone, i.e. universals, as he refers to them as, and they're also sensitive to triggers that call forth different emotions across individuals, even without a culture. Basically, that our auto-appraisers are also scanning for what's been important in the lives of our ancestors, too. He deduced that specific events we encounter over our lives are added to universal antecedent events, expanding what our auto-appraisers are alert to. If we encounter an event that's like what our auto-appraisers are already alert to, they're added as elaborations or additions to those universal antecedent events. And events that closely or distantly resemble an originally learned event are also added. He also states that only the variations and elaborations of those universal antecedent events, those universal themes, are learned, but the actual universal themes of emotions themselves are given, not acquired. He also explains that reflective appraisers are when we're consciously aware of our evaluative process, which becomes important in recognizing what triggers our emotional responses. So the whole point of all his research was not only to come up with explanations for why we have the emotions we have, but also if it's possible to eliminate certain responses. And this leads to the other big idea of recognizing and understanding when emotions are triggered. If we can do this, we can work on minimizing the extent to which our emotions affect our responses to the situations that triggered them. The following are explanations of those triggers that he deduced from his research. The closeness to the evolved theme, meaning the closer the learned trigger is to the unlearned theme, the harder it will be to decrease its power. How closely the current trigger resembles the original situation where it was learned, how early in life the trigger was learned, and the earlier, the harder it is to weaken it, the initial emotional charge, and the stronger the emotions that were experienced when the trigger was first learned, the harder it will be to weaken its impact, the frequency of the experience, meaning the repetitive occurrence of highly emotionally charged episodes during a short period of time, and the effective style of the individuals, meaning we all differ in speed and strength of emotional responses and our recovery time from those emotional responses. He finds that even with conscious effort, emotions can override our will to stop them from coming on. He does indicate that with time, understanding, and practice, moderating our emotional behavior becomes easier. Overall, although some of Ekman's studies may have researcher bias, he followed up with over 40 years of research, bringing in other thoughts and perspectives, compared data, and based new research off of investigations other than his own to try to examine the nature of emotions from every angle he could think of. He makes note of his potential researcher bias with asterisks and notations at the bottom of his pages. He goes back and he revises and edits his work. This is like even his revised edition. Like he went back and went through this to make sure that what he concluded was actually valid and maybe not necessarily reliable in certain aspects, but the conclusions that he came to based off of his research were valid. And also, whenever I came up with another question, such as, why do I still feel certain emotions when it seems inappropriate for my current situation? And I was thinking of how earlier in, I guess, 2017, I went to my soccer tournament, which I couldn't play in because I had fractured my foot. I still arrived at the hotel and I got butterflies in my stomach as if I were nervous in preparation for the tournament to begin. When I was at the games, I got a little nervous too, and all I could do was watch. I couldn't actually play. And not even a page later, he explained the idea of a refractory state, which is a time during which our thinking cannot incorporate information that does not fit, maintain, or justify the emotion that we are feeling. So he gave me a scientific explanation for the question that I had generated. This is just one case of how each time I came up with a question, it was answered. I even made note of it on my papers about how impressive it was that he clarified everything that I was questioning. And if I was ever confused while reading, everything became clear at the end, as he always summarized his points when he was done making them. And obviously, understanding emotions is a very difficult topic, and Ekman made it much easier for me to comprehend the material by doing everything that he did. So from this, I think that I and the other readers can take what we've learned from this book, how emotions developed evolutionarily, how they're triggered, and how to recognize those triggers, and apply it to our daily lives, so that we can practice recognition of those triggers and reflect back onto why they occur to better understand ourselves and maybe make better conscious decisions if we know why we are responding to a situation in a particular way. I still have a few questions. So I would like to see if there were any major differences across the cultures, or if the results truly were all the same, because I have a little bit of a hard time believing that everything was too similar to conclude that there were no major distinctions. I feel like there might have been some significant differences, and I would like to see if you could explain that a little more. I would also like to know if there are certain or specific internal factors, like within ourselves, that contribute to our emotions. A lot of what Ekman explained involved external factors that contributed to our automatic appraising systems, which technically are internal, but I'd specifically like to examine the role of chemicals and hormones in our emotional responses. Overall, I feel like this answered a lot of questions that I had about myself, and probably other people felt the same way, so I am glad that I read this book. So yes, emotions revealed. Basically what our auto appraisers are also scanning for.
Is Mom and Dad home?
No, and I'm recording something.
Did I come up screaming, I'm gonna be a rock star?
I don't know what you said, but you should go, because I wasn't gonna edit this, because I don't have time to do that, and now you're here, so I need you to go, so I can continue.
Bye.
And also screaming, let's not do that. Okay. He also deduced that specific events we encounter over our lives are added to universal. Ryan! Ryan, please stop singing! Okay. He deduced that specific events we encounter over our lives are added to
I need help.
He deduced that and events that are closely or even distantly resemble an originally learned. Frick, I'm gonna have to start that whole part over. Keep going. Okay. If we can do this, we can work on minimizing the extent to which party. In conclusion, like overall, what's wrong with you? Okay. Compare data and he just like goes back and revises and edits all this stuff. Please keep going.
I deserve to be roundhouse kicked right in the face.
Roundhouse, roadhouse.
Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse. Roadhouse, roadhouse, roadhouse. Roadhouse.
Trying to figure out exactly what made emotions. He whatever, and you know, our evolution, the evolution of certain emotions. Cut that part out, Kaylee.